time for another prediction video. I know stuff. Yeah, good morning. That's Uncle Lou here. That's right. It is me, Lustradamus. Live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post pointless, barely watchable college football videos almost every single day of the year. We have a really good time on this channel. We got a good community of people. Make sure you subscribe and join the party. You'll be glad you did. Hit the thumbs up today. We're going to do a prediction for Alabama's 2025 college football season. I'm going to go through it game by game, give you a winner and a loser for every single week, and see if we can figure out what Alabama's record might look like for 2025. Now, last year, of course, Kalen DeBoer's first year at Alabama ended in a 9-3 regular season with a couple of bad losses and a couple of good wins. My prediction for Alabama last year, if you're wondering, I had Alabama at 10-2. And they actually, of course, went 9-3. I did, however, successfully predict Alabama's loss on the road at Oklahoma as part of my preseason prediction last year. That was a pick I took a lot of heat for. I ended up getting that one. Right. I had them losing, or I had them beating Tennessee. They lost to Tennessee, so I had a little bit right, a little bit wrong about Alabama last season. Overall, I was a game off. I had them at 10-2. They went 9-3, barely missing the playoffs before losing to Michigan in the bowl game. So can they improve on that this season? If last year is any indication, then 10-2 looks to be kind of the point you're trying to hit in the SEC if you want to make the playoffs. Of course, that could change from year to year based on what other teams' records are around the country. It's possible we see some 9-3 teams get in. Who knows? There's going to be maybe some 10-2 teams that don't get in, but about 10-2 I think is what most teams should shoot for a legitimate shot at the postseason after the end of the regular season. Of course, if you win your conference, and Alabama I think has a chance to do that this year, you get your automatic bid into the playoffs. But short of that, for an at-large spot, I think teams should probably shoot for around the 10-2 mark. So we'll see if they can improve this year. Now, they've made some significant changes from last season to this season, both roster-wise and coaching staff-wise, which we'll talk a little bit about here before we get into the prediction video. The biggest change as far as the staff goes, I think, is bringing Ryan Grubb back as offensive coordinator. I say back reunited with Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer's last year at Washington, when they made the playoffs and went on that really good run, Ryan Grubb was Kalen DeBoer's offensive coordinator that season. When Kalen DeBoer left Washington to take the job at Alabama, Ryan Grubb took a job in the NFL with the Seattle Seahawks. That was a one-and-done type of situation. Now he's back with Kalen DeBoer as the offensive coordinator at Alabama, and I do think that will make a little bit of a difference. That combined with the departure of Jalen Milroe and what looks like anyway to be the Ty Simpson era about to begin at Alabama. I think that's most likely who will start at quarterback this season for Alabama will be Ty Simpson. You go back and you watch the spring practices or the spring games. That's the way it looks. Now, I'm as high on Keelan Russell as everybody else is, especially the Alabama fans. I think there's no doubt or question about it. He is the most talented quarterback on Alabama's roster right now, the highest ceiling, most potential, however you want to put it. However, Ty Simpson has been there for a while. This is, of course, will be his second year up underneath Kalen DeBoer. He's been at Bama even longer than that, going back to the Saban days. And I do feel like Alabama is a good enough team around the quarterback position to where you don't really have to roll the dice and take a chance on a true freshman quarterback. Now, I do think we will see Keelan Russell play in 2025, whether that means the second halves of any potential blowouts that Alabama might be involved in, or even certain packages designed for Keelan Russell. You kind of think about the way Texas has used Arch Manning over the last couple of years. I could see Kalen DeBoer in Alabama utilizing Keelan Russell in 2025 in a similar way. I think he's too good to just sort of shelf him on the bench for the entire year. I think we'll see a significant amount of Keelan Russell, but unless Alabama takes multiple losses in the first half of the season and sort of plays themselves out of playoff contention early on, I really feel like they're going to ride with Ty Simpson as long as the playoffs are still within reach. And I think that's probably the best thing to do. You know, there are some other teams that maybe aren't as talented as Alabama top to bottom that need to roll the dice on sort of young and experienced QBs. I don't really view Alabama that way. I know last year was a disappointing season for the Alabama fans at 9-3, especially with those two really bad losses to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. But the reality is Alabama is still one of the most talented rosters in the country, if not the most talented. Kalen DeBoer really hasn't skipped a beat when it comes to recruiting at Alabama. Now, we'll see how that continues over the next few years based on how Alabama's able to do over the next couple of years. But there's no denying the amount of talent that's on Alabama's roster. Now, I mentioned losing Jalen Milroe. They lose a few other pieces too, like they do every single year. Look, you don't recruit inside the top 5, top 10 every single year for 15 years in a row and then not lose players to the NFL draft every single year. They also lost a few key players to the portal, but again, not unusual for teams that recruit on the level of an Alabama. Milroe gone off to the NFL. Justice Haynes, who was sort of RB2 last year, he has transferred to Michigan. We already talked about Ty Simpson and Keelan Russell stepping in at the quarterback position this year. Jam Miller, who received most of the carries last year anyway as RB1, he's back. I would expect him to receive an even more significant number of carries in 2025. Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard are back at wide receiver. Ryan Williams, of course, got all the headlines last year. Yet 17 years old, skipped his senior year of high school. That whole deal, had that unbelievable game and miracle catch at the end of the Georgia game that gave them the win there at home over Georgia, which ended up being Alabama's best win of the season. Peaked in week 4. Alabama did last year, which was a real shame. But Jeremy Bernard is good too. He didn't have a lot of touchdowns last year, but he had a ton of catches, and I think he'll be really, really good. Again, a reliable target for Ty Simpson there at the wide receiver position to go along with the sort of breakout star on the other side in Ryan Williams. And it's important that Ryan Williams have a Jeremy Bernard on the other side, right? No matter how good you are as a wide receiver, you're a lot better when the other team can't focus solely on you. We see this work in Ohio State's favor year in and year out, right? You want to talk about Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. Well, they've got 3 other NFL wide receivers on the roster too, right? So you just can't triple cover Jeremiah Smith every play. They've got 2 or 3 other NFL wide receivers on the other side of the field that'll burn you bad. And this is going to be the case this year with Alabama, I think. While Ryan Williams will receive the lion's share of the attention from defensive coordinators and secondaries, Jeremy Bernard is a good enough wide receiver where you have to pay attention to him too. So I think Alabama's passing game and offense in general really will be better in 2025 than what we saw in 2024. Part of it is the Jalen Milroe effect, right? I don't really think Jalen Milroe was ever a really good quarterback. He was extremely athletic. He had some big plays. He had some great plays. I don't feel like he ever played the position of quarterback particularly well. He took way too many sacks, and when he took a sack, it tended to be a 15-yard loss instead of a 2-yard loss. He had a real hard time hitting receivers on sort of your intermediate routes. He threw a great deep ball, right? And he could scramble and burn you bad. But overall, I just didn't feel like he played the position of quarterback that well. And while Ty Simpson might not have the physical tools of a Jalen Milroe, in fact, he doesn't have the physical tools of a Jalen Milroe, I think he may be able to run a Kalen DeBoer offense more effectively and efficiently than what we saw out of Jalen Milroe. So I would not at all be surprised to see Alabama have a better offense in 2025 for all of those reasons I just talked about than they did even in 2024. Now, over on the defensive side of the ball, I think they're going to be good this year. My only real concern about Alabama defensively would be the defensive line. They're not as deep as they once were at that position. And I don't think that's necessarily a Kalen DeBoer thing or issue. I think a lot of teams are kind of suffering from this. Talked about teams that recruit in the top 5 or top 10 every single year, losing players to the NFL draft every single year and having to replace those, usually with more NFL players. The issue a lot of teams like Bama are having now that recruit in the top 5 every single year is those backups who sort of used to be waiting to fill in when guys went off to the draft. In a lot of situations now, those guys are transferring out. So there's just less depth overall at the defensive line position position at Alabama than what we're used to seeing in the past. But again, you could almost make that case for any of the teams that are recruiting in the top 5 and top 10 and are sort of getting rated through the transfer portal in the offseason. But that's the only real concern I would have about them defensively. Dominique Jackson at cornerback, Keon Saab back at safety. They brought in a couple of transfers in the secondary, including Cameron Calhoun from Utah. They brought in another wide receiver through the portal from Miami. Horton is his name. They brought a tight end in. So they've done what I think teams should do when it comes to the portal, which is you don't need to go out and get 20 players like Florida State or Colorado or sort of these teams that can't recruit, right? You fill key holes, you fill key needs, and you fill position groups that maybe don't have the depth that you need. And I think they've done a good job. With that. And as much as people probably don't want to hear it, we're all probably sick of seeing Alabama win a bunch of games every year. I'd be absolutely shocked if they don't improve in 2025 over what they did in 2024. I don't think it's a very good idea to count on Alabama losing to teams like Vanderbilt and Oklahoma every single year. Now, when I say Oklahoma, I mean last year's version of Oklahoma, teams like that. In other words, teams that are hovering around a 500 record. There's not going to be very many times in the near future under Kalen DeBoer or any other coach, in my opinion, where a team as talented as Alabama is losing to multiple teams a year that are bad, really. They lost on the road at Tennessee, but Tennessee was a good team. Maybe they weren't great, but they were good. They made the playoffs at 10-2. So while Alabama never wants to lose to Tennessee, it's a rivalry game. That's not what I would consider to be an embarrassing loss to lose on the road at Tennessee, right? They were a top 10 team. You had to play them on the road with a first-year head coach. There's no excuse for the Vanderbilt and Oklahoma loss from last year. And I don't think that's like a repeatable mistake that Kalen DeBoer and Alabama are likely to make in the future. So if you're counting on Alabama going 9-3 again or worse in 2025, I don't think you can count on games like Vandy and Oklahoma. And I don't mean those games specifically. I mean teams like that. If you think Alabama's going 9-3 or worse, then that means you think they're going to lose to basically all of the good teams that they play, or the top 10, your Georgias, your LSUs, maybe your South Carolina, something like that. And I just don't know if they're going to lose all of those games. Again, I've got the schedule pulled up right here, and we're going to go through it in a second. As far as the odds for Alabama in 2025, they're currently listed with the third best odds to win the SEC, just behind Georgia and Texas, who are the two front runners this year. Coming out of the SEC, at least right now, Alabama sits third in the odds, just ahead of LSU and Texas A&M. All right, let's take a look at the schedule. We're going to go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, Alabama's got a lot of slack in years past about some of their scheduling choices, but I don't want to hear anything from anybody about the schedule this year. They play 2 Power 4 opponents outside of the SEC. Are either one of them any good? No. Is that Alabama's fault? No. Florida State and Wisconsin both, in any random year over the last 20 years, would be considered a quote-unquote good team. Wisconsin, they averaged 10 wins a year over the last 20 years. Florida State, we know what they've done over the last 25, 30 years, going back to the Bobby Bowden days. Just so happens that right now, both of those two teams are kind of in the gutter, circling the drain, sort of, so to speak, waiting on somebody to come along and flush it. And in Florida State's case, the hand that flushes that toilet, I believe, in week 1 is going to be Alabama. I think Alabama will beat the absolute soul out of Florida State. It is on the road. They do have to play in Tallahassee. And because the game is early in the season, everybody's undefeated. I expect Florida State's crowd to be revved up and ready to go. I just don't think it'll matter. I am not buying Mike Norvell at all, and I'm not buying Florida State this season at all. They've completely turned their roster over last year to this year through the portal. The 20-something players they brought in, portal players at almost every single position group on both sides of the ball, offensive line and defensive line, wide receiver, running back, and quarterback, linebacker, secondary. It's going to be, if you're a Florida State fan, you're not going to recognize the roster that takes the field on week 1 from what you saw last year. Now, on one hand, it might be considered a positive because they were absolutely terrible last year going 2-10. And I don't think they're going to be that bad this season. They've got Castellanos at quarterback, and while I don't think he's great and is going to be up for any Heisman Awards at the end of the year, I think he'd be an obvious improvement over what they got last year out of the ukulele. But it's just not enough to win this game, even at home. I think Alabama starts out 1-0, and Florida State's streak of never having a win against Alabama will continue. I know they beat Alabama once, but they don't have any wins against Alabama. And if that confuses you, well, look up what vacated wins mean. Or don't cheat. How about that? Florida State, don't cheat, or don't get caught cheating, or whatever you want to say. But they did get caught in an academic scandal and had to vacate some wins back in the late 2000s. And one of those wins was the only win they had ever had over Alabama. So technically, by the record book, even though they beat Alabama on the field in a game, they don't really have any wins over Alabama. And I think that will continue. Alabama starts out 1-0. With a win against Florida State. And they come back home, take on Louisiana Monroe, a name your score type of game here. I think we'll see significant playing time from Keelan Russell in this game. I talked a lot about him in the beginning of this video and the lead up to the prediction here. Now, I think we'll probably see him on the road at Florida State, too, again, in like certain packages, whether that's red zone or some QB scramble type deals, whatever the case. But I think in this Louisiana Monroe game, if Bama can, get a big lead at halftime, which would be the goal, that's always the goal in these types of games, and you put your backups in the second half, I think this will be our first real significant look, potentially at Keelan Russell at quarterback. Bama will get a big win there. And then a home game against Wisconsin, and again, not Bama's fault, but Wisconsin's just not very good. Luke Fickell has not worked out there, at least so far. Wisconsin decided to go a different direction because they were tired of winning 9 or 10 games a year. And now they're winning 6 and 7 games a year. It just has not worked out. It feels like this might be a make or break type situation for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. And unfortunately, when you look at Wisconsin's schedule, the odds favor break, not make. They've got probably the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it doesn't get any better in the non-common. You got to travel and play Bama on the road. Bama beat them last year up there in Madison, and I expect a similar result this season. Bama will be 3-0. Then they have a bye week, and then they have arguably their biggest game of the season on the road at Georgia. I think Georgia's going to be good again in 2025. They're the defending SEC champions. They lost to Bama last year on the road in Tuscaloosa in one of the wildest games you'll ever see. I mean, Alabama beat Georgia in the first half of that game. Worse than I've seen Georgia get beaten over a decade. I mean, it looked like an NFL All-Pro team playing a middle school team. It was embarrassing for Georgia, the way they performed and got drug up and down the field in the first half of that game. They, of course, mounted a comeback in the second half, came up short after that miraculous touchdown catch by Ryan Williams, sealed the deal late. And now they got to travel to Athens. They haven't played in Athens since 2015. And guess what? They blew Georgia out in that one, too. The game was like 28-0 before anybody even knew what was going on. This will be Kirby Smart's first time facing Alabama as the head coach of Georgia in Athens. Now, Georgia and Alabama have gone at it multiple times in the Kirby Smart era, but all of those games have either been at Alabama or neutral site games, SEC championship games, or national title games. So they've played in Tuscaloosa twice. Georgia has under Kirby Smart, lost both times, and then the multiple SEC championship and national title games. Kirby Smart's 1-5. 1-6, something like that against Bama. Seems to be his kryptonite. Now, if Georgia fans were kind of hoping, well, it's a Nick Saban thing. Kirby just can't beat Saban, right? Didn't he go into Tuscaloosa last year and get ran out of the building in the first half? So I don't know. It appears to be some sort of a mental hurdle that Kirby has a hard time getting over when it comes to Alabama. And I look at this game between Georgia and Bama right now about the same way I look at an Ohio State-Michigan game. In most years, I think Ohio State's a better overall team than Michigan. I think Ohio State was better last year for sure than Michigan, but they lost. Ohio State was better in 2022 than Michigan, but they lost. They were better than Michigan in 2021, but they lost. Georgia has lost a bunch of games to Alabama when Georgia was the better team. I think Georgia was the better team last year, and they lost. There are multiple losses Georgia has to Alabama when Georgia was the favorite and considered to be the better team. On the road for Bama at Georgia, Georgia will probably be favored in this game. Now, Georgia plays Tennessee before they play Bama, whereas Alabama plays Florida State and Wisconsin. I fully expect Alabama to be undefeated when this game is played on September 27th, technically week 5. It's the fourth game for both teams. They both have a bye week before this game, Bama and Georgia do. I can't pick Bama to win the game, or I can't pick Georgia to win. I can't do it anymore until I see Georgia beat them. It's just hard to pick Georgia to beat Bama right now. Do I think Georgia could beat them? Yeah, Georgia hasn't lost a home game since 2019. In fact, they've only lost one home game since 2016, and that was in 2019. They were undefeated at home in 17 and 18, lost one home game in 19. And they're undefeated at home in every year since then, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. And I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia wins the game. I won't be surprised if Georgia's favored. I think a lot of that will depend on whether or not Georgia has beaten Tennessee on the road in Knoxville or whether Georgia has lost. And if they did lose, how did they lose? How bad was it? It's possible Bama could be favored if Georgia takes a loss to Tennessee. It doesn't matter. I can't pick Georgia to win. I think Alabama rolls. They're 4-0. Didn't they come back home for a revenge game against Vandy, which sounds really weird to say, but I think Alabama will beat the soul out of Vanderbilt. And look, Vanderbilt was a fun story last year. Diego Poverty's fun to watch at quarterback. They're not a great team. I mean, they're just not. Yeah, they beat Alabama last year. They also struggled to get to 6 wins. I mean, both things can be true at the same time. I don't want to call it a fluke win. It feels disrespectful to Vandy, but if Bama and Vandy would have played 10 times last year, Bama would have beat them 9. Now, that doesn't matter. You don't play series in football. You play one game, and Vandy beat them, and it was a huge win for them. And a bad look for Kalen DeBoer, no question about it. But that doesn't mean I'm picking it to happen again in Tuscaloosa. I think Alabama beats Vanderbilt. They're still undefeated. At Missouri, now, this is the first game on the schedule where I had to sort of think for a few minutes before I hit record here which way I wanted to go. All of Kalen DeBoer's losses last year as head coach of Alabama occurred on the road. They lost at Tennessee, at Vanderbilt, at Oklahoma, and a neutral site bowl game. They lost to Michigan. So there are some struggles on the road there, at least year one for Kalen DeBoer. And Missouri has been a 9 or more win team each of the last 2 seasons. Now, these 2 teams played last year in Tuscaloosa, and Alabama destroyed them. And I don't think Missouri is going to be as good in 2025 as they were in 2024, and definitely not as good as they were in 2023. I think that was their best year, 2023. Last year they went 9-3, but they might have been the worst 9-win team in the country. I didn't think they were a top 25 team. And I think they'll be worse than that this coming season. I don't think they'll be as good as they were either the last 2 years. So I think Alabama goes on the road and gets a win at Missouri. But I did consider, and look, if you're looking for one of these like weird losses, trap game, sort of out of the blue things that are hard to predict, at Missouri is not the worst pick here if you're looking for a loss for Bama. Most teams lose a game every year that you don't expect, right? I do think this is a possibility, but I'm going to give Bama the win on the road at Missouri. Then they host Tennessee. I probably would have picked Bama to win this game even before Tennessee's quarterback situation unraveled and Nico transferred out the day before the spring game, and they're now stuck with a group of 5 quarterback and 2 young kids who have never played because the game is in Tuscaloosa. And Tennessee, I just talked about Alabama losing on the road last year under Kalen DeBoer. Right now, that's not really a trend for Alabama and Kalen DeBoer because last year was his first year, so you only have the 1 year to go on. We've got a lot of years of Josh Heupel at Tennessee, and they struggle on the road every single year, including last year when they lost to a bad Arkansas team on the road. I don't see Tennessee going into Tuscaloosa and beating this year's Alabama team. I know Tennessee has a couple of wins over Alabama recently. Both of those wins occurred in Knoxville, though. I think the losing streak for Tennessee at Tuscaloosa continues. Bama is still undefeated heading into what I think is going to be a huge game on the road at South Carolina. Talked about the Vandy game and made a joke about it being sort of a revenge game for Alabama because they lost. I think this is the same thing here for South Carolina. South Carolina feels like they let that Alabama game slip away last year, which hurts even more for South Carolina at the end of the year when they're sitting there at 9-3 and you're looking at these 10-2 teams into playoffs and it's the whole what could have been type thing. Their quarterback is back. Nicholas Harbor's back as tight end / wide receiver. I think he's going to have a breakout year. Now, South Carolina is missing some key pieces from last year on the defensive line and offensively with the running game. And they do not recruit at the level of an Alabama or some of your teams that recruit in the top 5 every single year. So I've got some concerns about South Carolina. One concern I don't have about South Carolina is the home crowd and the environment that they create in big home games. I think South Carolina beats Alabama in Columbia. We've seen them do it before. Now, it was a long time ago. Under Steve Spurrier, Alabama went in there ranked number 1 and got beat. That can be a tough place to play. It sounds kind of funny to people maybe who don't follow South Carolina or the SEC or whatever, because in a random year, South Carolina is generally not that good, honestly. Definitely not in the elite category. But it doesn't matter whether South Carolina is 12-0 or 0-12. Their fans are insane. Now, South Carolina is probably my least favorite team. As a Georgia fan, if Georgia was going to go 1-11, I would want that one win to be against South Carolina. So I'm not some sort of South Carolina sycophant. I'm not here to sort of try to pump up South Carolina for some sort of fake reason. I think they've got the potential to be a good team in 2025. They were a good team last year at 9-3. Shane Beamer has exceeded expectations in 3 of his 4 years in South Carolina. South Carolina's ranked inside the top 15 in most of your preseason polls and rankings. And again, playing this game at Williams-Brice Stadium, especially if it's at night, it's tough for anybody to go in there and get a win. And I think South Carolina catches Alabama in a good spot here coming off of that Tennessee game. Big home win for Kalen DeBoer in Tennessee. It'll be Kalen DeBoer's first win against Tennessee in the third Saturday in October rivalry game. And it's going to be tough, I think, for the Alabama team to turn around and have to play on the road against South Carolina in a hostile environment the following week. I think Alabama gets upset on the road and South Carolina beats Alabama, which could be huge for South Carolina when it gets to the end of the year in the SEC and trying to figure out who makes the SEC championship game. Because if it comes down to any type of tiebreak scenarios there, South Carolina would have went over Alabama, will be in good shape. Alabama gets a week off then to sort of regroup before hosting LSU, who they absolutely destroyed last season in Baton Rouge. I think they get to win again at home this year. Now, I think LSU is going to be really good. I think LSU is a better team than South Carolina in this season. Talked about Lenore Sellers, the quarterback for South Carolina, and I am high on him. Nussmeier's another one. If he can cut down on the turnovers, that's really the only downside of him. He can make every throw. He's got a ton of experience, an NFL arm. I really like their ground game. They get a running back who went for 1,000 yards last year as a true freshman. I think LSU, if they can hit on a few key portal additions, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I think LSU is a legitimate contender to play for the SEC championship and make the playoffs in 2025, but I do not think they're beating Alabama on the road in Tuscaloosa. Alabama's still sitting with just the one loss. And then they get Oklahoma at home. Now, I think Oklahoma is going to be a much better team than they were last year, and they beat Alabama last year in a game in Norman. This time the game is a home game for Kalen DeBoer and company in Tuscaloosa, and I think they get some revenge here. I think they beat Oklahoma. Oklahoma's got a new quarterback, John Mateer. They're going to be a lot better offensively than they were last year. Defensively, they were okay last year. Their offense was a complete mess. And Oklahoma's got a brutal schedule. I don't know if they'll get to 10 wins or compete for an SEC championship or a playoff berth, but I do think they will be a much better version of themselves than what we saw last year, but not enough to get it done on the road in Tuscaloosa. Alabama still with just one loss. Eastern Illinois for no reason, easy win. And then the Iron Bowl on the road at Auburn. Now, here's the thing that makes this game particularly tricky this year in my mind. First of all, we all know the history of the Iron Bowl. We've seen a lot of weird things happen. We've seen a lot of really good Alabama teams go into Jordan-Hare Stadium on the road at Auburn and lose. Freakish things happen there. Alabama's so much better than Auburn right now, it can't really be exaggerated. Hugh Freeze has struggled there, and he brought in Jackson Arnold to play quarterback. And I'm not very high on the chances of that working out. He was absolutely terrible last year at Oklahoma, Jackson Arnold was. Now, I do think that Hugh Freeze at Auburn has a better chance of extracting the talent out of Jackson Arnold than Brent Venables and company did at Oklahoma, but I don't know if it'll be enough for Auburn to have a really good season and compete for an SEC title. However, Hugh Freeze's job could be on the line in this game here. I think Auburn needs to win 7 or 8 games in order for Hugh Freeze to not have to worry about getting fired. If Auburn is sitting at 6 or 7 wins here when this game comes around, it's going to be an all hands on deck, throw everything at it type of situation for Hugh Freeze and Auburn, and it could be a dangerous situation for Bama. However, I just think Bama's too good, and I think Auburn they don't have what they need at quarterback. Unless I'm wrong about Jackson Arnold, if Jackson Arnold ends up doing a 180 and having a big year, then I think this could become an interesting game at the end of the season. But right now, until I see Jackson Arnold play well, it's hard for me to have enough confidence in that to pick Auburn to win this game, even though it is in Auburn. I've got Alabama going on the road and winning the Iron Bowl. I've got Alabama at 11-1. Their only loss being on the road at South Carolina. And unless something really, really strange happens, 2 undefeated teams come out of the SEC, which I do not think is going to happen. I think Alabama punches their ticket to the SEC championship game in Atlanta, and win or lose there. I think Alabama makes the playoffs in 2025. I've got Alabama at 11-1. Their only loss coming on the road right before Halloween at South Carolina, a road loss for Bama in Columbia right after their big home win against Tennessee. They get caught napping and lose to South Carolina. But 11-1 and a trip to the SEC championship game for Alabama in 2025. That's the Lustradamus prediction. All right, be sure to let me know down below where I'm wrong, and have a good morning.